afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime series where we add value to people's lives, happening every Wednesday and Thursday on ebizradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime series on all major podcast channels. And today's coaching segment, we have our communications director for FutureFactor joining us all the way from the Netherlands. And we're going to be chatting about how companies become future fit. But before we do that, please welcome to the show, Chris Verrijdt. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm good, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me, and hello to your viewers and your listeners.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you can hear by his accent that he's South African. You're all the way from South Africa and moved to the Netherlands, Chris. So, I mean, to kick it off straight away, don't you want to tell us more about who you are, what you do, a bit of your backstory, and sort of give us some insight about you?
Yeah, sure. So I come from an integrated communications background. I started an agency, I think must have been 2010, that was acquired by a multinational agency. And then I headed up their sub-Saharan division for a couple of years, and then decided that I wanted to go more the consultancy route. So what I did is I got mostly people that I had known through the industry or friends of mine, and we sort of formed this collective where, depending on who got the brief, depended on who would be doing the work, and then we would kind of like divvy it up according to whatever the spec was. I ended up being focused a lot in the creative industry as well as hospitality. So that allowed me to kind of enjoy hospitality, because I've always sort of like worked in and around the hospitality industry. And then also from the other clients, it was very lifestyle focused. So it was a cool place, a cool space to play in. And also I knew that I had, if we were launching a restaurant, for example, I had the best restaurant launcher person on the PR team. You know, my social media team was based out of Durban, had a crisis comms person in Cape Town. And it gave me insight into how you can really run a business as a collective, collaborating, not necessarily being in the same place at the same, well, obviously you need to be there at the same time, but not necessarily in the same place. And one of my biggest kind of wins, I think, was just before COVID, managing to get all my clients onto Zoom. So because, you know, I would be traveling, you know, it's Joburg, it's not that big. So, but you'd be traveling half an hour, 45 minutes for a 15-minute meeting, and then sort of like making the commute back.
Yeah.
So one of my biggest clients was Legacy Hotels. So they had over 20 hotels in 40 countries. And 2020, you know, if you can cast your mind back, 2020, everybody heralded as the year of 2020. Business was doing really, really well. Pipeline was looking good. My fiance, Anthony, unfortunately, was suffering from burnout. So he was on sabbatical for the year. And we said, you know, I said, no problem. You know, I'll be able to carry both of us through the year. And then on the 27th of March, everything changed. My revenue dropped by 60%. And then in true South African spirit, I started hustling. So it was on the 8th of August, actually, just around Women's Day, that we made the decision, look, I'm working remotely anyway. We both have Dutch passports. Let's just make the move to the Netherlands. We'd been here in 2018. It was very weird for us to be in a culture where we automatically felt at home that wasn't South Africa. And, you know, we were sitting on a terrace, you know, drinking probably a Heineken, and thinking, wow, we could really live here and really see ourselves building a life for us here. And, you know, when the conversation, you know, in the middle of COVID, where we didn't know how long it was going to last, if there's going to be a vaccine, et cetera, you know, I just thought to myself, I was 46 then, and to be in an environment, going to a new country with a new culture, where people that would probably be hiring me would be half my age. It was probably the best time to move on this side of 50 as opposed to that side of 50.
Yeah.
So we made the decision and thought, yeah, we just sell our house and get on a plane and then go. And then so started a nearly 1 year process to finally get us to the Netherlands. So yeah, we got here in July last year. So we've been here for just over a year.
Amazing. So I mean, yeah, it's not the easiest thing to do. I know that like we've chatted a number of times already around this, and it comes with a whole bunch of challenges. But one of the things that you mentioned is the pervasiveness of imposter syndrome in SAFAs in New Zealand, in the Netherlands. Why do you think there is a sort of an imposter syndrome, and what is that about?
Well, firstly, I'm sure it's pervasive in New Zealand as well.
Yes.
South Africans are, we're incredibly hard workers. People love hiring us because we are so committed to getting the work done. I do think South Africa as a culture, we have a small country complex. This is something that I wouldn't say I've been verbose about, but it's something that I've kind of cited for years and years and years, where like a new iPhone would launch in New York and then somebody in Johannesburg would have one the next day to show that, we also have the new iPhone in South Africa. And yet you look at some of the talent that comes out, some of the, innovations that come out of South Africa, we really don't have a hell of a lot to prove from a talent perspective. Give you a brief example. My niece is working as a yachty at the moment. She was in France. Her wallet was stolen, and with that was her debit card. So obviously to get a new debit card, she would need to go into the bank in South Africa. So we were like, no problem. Can't I just, like you would do in South Africa, I would just SMS you some money. You can just go to the ATM and just draw it. Nothing like that exists in Europe except in Spain. And she was in France. Didn't help. Yeah. So when it comes to the imposter syndrome and this, I've kind of been spared from this because of working at FutureFactor and kind of like the structures and the onboardings that they had in place. But a lot of South Africans that I speak to on this side of the equator, they do struggle with this, working too hard, being told that, I mean, the Dutch sort of as a nation, like average is good enough, like give it your best. But I've never worked in a culture where you start at 9:15, you take your lunch, and then you finish at 5. I had a friend of mine who works for one of the biggest insurers in the Netherlands, and the CEO was doing a presentation on, let's say, like 10 o'clock the next morning. She updated the deck, sent it at 10 that night, thought of something while she was sleeping, updated it at 6 in the morning, and then got a written response from HR saying, you only being paid to work 38 hours a week. If you do this again, we'll need to have an intervention.
Yeah.
So that work-life balance is really challenging to kind of find the right balance and find the right fit. Because, it's a new country, it's a new culture. I mean, there are 180 different nationalities that are in amongst, the Amsterdammers, there's a huge expat community. So to get that balance is something that I found initially really, really challenging. Because in South Africa, I mean, you're an entrepreneur, especially as an entrepreneur, you burn the midnight oil. You make sure that you meet the deadlines. You don't talk back to your clients. You deliver, what they want, preferably before they want it, just because you're constantly hustling. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I've had to learn, and I'm still learning, is that, my CEO always says to me that perfection is the enemy of progress. Stop spending so much time trying to get it right. Just get it to a point where it is good enough, and then let the experts jump in. And that's been it was probably one of the biggest challenges I had to learn. The other one was about everybody kind of like has their lane. So my first day on the job, I was like jumping in and doing stuff, and my staff were saying to me, like, our job is to do the work. Your job is to make sure we do the work. If there is a challenge or we need your input, we'll come to you. So, and that is not just from me. It's other friends of mine that are also HODs, or have got subordinates, I guess, reporting into them. So it's a big mind shift in terms of how we work in South Africa, where everybody's kind of doing everything all the time, to here to have that kind of like that, to get that real work-life balance. You don't work on weekends, it's completely frowned upon. And in South Africa, where, I mean, and I'm guilty of this as anyone, you would work your 100-hour weeks and, go into Facebook and proclaim it to the world. Here, people don't want to know it. You're paid for your time, but at 9 o'clock in the morning, people work. No one's on Facebook, no one's on Instagram, no one's on WhatsApp. They stop, they have lunch, they get on, and then at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever the day ends, that's it, down tools, and then off you go.
Yeah, and I find it so interesting. And I mean, you and I, like, we chatted about this before, and it is a thing that South Africans have this ingrained kind of thing about how we feel like we need to do that bit of extra just to get the work done and get it out there and hustle, as you mentioned. But I mean, it leads to the next question. What is FutureFactor and the impact of having an empathetic leadership? Because I think it's the concept of empathetic leadership is quite foreign to to a lot of people, especially in South Africa, that because I live here and I work with a lot of South Africans. But as a concept, as a whole concept, I don't think it exists very prevalently in the world. And why is this important to talk about?
Well, I mean, sort of in broad strokes, FutureFactor is a global communications consultancy. We've got offices in Amsterdam, Los Angeles, and in London. And I'll come back to sort of, the kind of work we do and the positioning we do. But just from a leadership perspective, what I found was really interesting is that our current team was all built during COVID on Zoom, and yet there is an incredibly strong culture. There is a way that we behave towards each other, which I guess you could, bring back into culture as well. Yeah. But when I talk about empathetic leadership, there really is a sense of like caring, and not just from the leadership, but from my colleagues as well. They take mental health incredibly seriously. I mean, if somebody is having an off day, or something has happened perhaps personally, you're so within the boundaries to say, I'm not having a good day, I'm going to take the rest of the day off, knowing, but also, we're still running a company. So it comes with the responsibility, and that's what I really, really enjoy about this. Sure, you can take the day off, just make sure that you've informed the line manager. So if it was my team, it would be me, or one of the other teams would be their line managers, to make sure that balls aren't dropped. But the fact that they take it so seriously, for me, from the get-go, it was incredible. A colleague of mine, she had to take her dog to the vet, and obviously that was very traumatic for her. So people totally got it and jumped in where they needed to, and it really comes back to, FutureFactor's values in terms of like, we express ourselves honestly, openly, and intelligently. We approach our relationships with empathy, kindness, and integrity, and we approach our work with ambition, courage, and imagination. Like, part of my package included a self-discovery budget, not a self-discovery budget, a personal development budget.
Yeah,
that I can then use at my own discretion to make me a better version of myself, and just that thought process, and that going into making sure that, because if you're in a safe space, you then have the permission to be yourself, and with that comes authenticity, and it allows creativity to flourish and to flow without the fear of judgment. And I think that often in a South African context, there was the big cheese in the room. You could question it, but ultimately it was their vision, you went with it. Whereas here, it seems to be much more collaborative. And because we have so many different nationalities, I mean, I work with Dutch people, English people, American people, another South African, and then it's me. But also the ages range from early 20s to say late 50s, early 60s. So you've got these different generational cohorts, plus then you've got these different experiences. Then you throw gender into the mix, you throw sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and then race as well. And you get all these different perspectives coming at the same idea from different perspectives, and everybody needs to be heard. And out of that will come the best work. And you can ask anybody who's fully embraced D&I, and that's something as well that I've seen that's very, very different, at least from my perspective, in the Netherlands, is that D&I doesn't just stop at race, it doesn't stop at gender, it doesn't stop at sexual orientation, but it includes people that are neurodivergent, for example, people that are differently abled. And that's incredible to be in a space and to be in a country that actively supports that and fights for that.
Yeah. But one of the questions that sort of really sort of comes out of that for me is, and I just want your take on this, because your stance on it comes from a very different position right now, being at FutureFactor. Do you think it also depends on trust?
Yes.
Being able to employ people who you trust.
Absolutely. And it's also to build that trust. You know, the only way you know if you can trust someone is to trust them.
Yeah.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it's the reality. Like, how do you know you can if you don't try? You know, and that trust is so important. But again, it comes back down to the values of and also the purpose. Like, why are we all here? And if, you know, a company is the collection of people that are working together towards a specific goal. And trust definitely comes into that. If I have to take the afternoon off, I trust, well, firstly, my colleagues trust that I've then asked them what to do or how to step in, or my leadership trust me, even if I'm taking vacation, they trust me that all the boxes have been ticked in terms of handovers. If we are sick, you don't have to spend your sick day going to the doctor to get a sick note. If you're sick and you're offline. There's no like working, like, you know, not South African, working from the bed, working offline, you know, like the usual. The joke in Johannesburg was always like, if you're sick, it just means that you're working from your bed. You know, there's none of that here. If you're sick, you need to get better.
Yeah.
End of story. So trust is a huge factor.
Yeah, I mean, and I find it so interesting because this is one of the things that I often share in, you know, even in training is, and it stems down from the very examples of what the country that you're living in sort of represents as well. You know, when the leadership of a country doesn't represent what leadership could look like, it's very difficult for the nation of a country to show up, you know, in a way that's sort of representative of what leadership could be. So then it comes back to the human element of like, how do I self-develop to the best leader I can possibly be, even though everything that's sort of showcased in the nation that I live in isn't supportive of that, you know. So it's fascinating how, you know, the two influence each other, especially when you see it from two different countries' perspectives like that. But I mean, to add to this, Chris, what does FutureFactor do? Tell us more about FutureFactor, and then moving into that, how do companies become future fit? Because that's also one of the big questions heading into the future is, how do organizations start doing this? Because I think a lot of people, I mean, you've touched on some of the stuff now, you know, just being empathetic leadership, the trust, the fact that you support that with values, and you know, there's so much. But I mean, so what do you do? First, tell us what you do, and then and how do we become future fit?
Well, firstly, you can't plan how the world will change, but you can plan for when it does. And that's really kind of the sweet spot where FutureFactor fits in. I mean, what we do as a business is help clients speak their truth. We support them to positively impact business culture, communities, and the planet. So we have a process, so it's called prove, improve, and impact. So the prove stage is where we get the stakeholders together and really unpack who they are as a business, how they see themselves, and then we take that and we develop narratives that are specific to them. Like for us, it's really about them speaking their truths, being able to seem to be, to lead, to be able to drive debate, but also to be authentic and to be truthful. And the only way that you can be authentic is to really strip down and go back to the essence of what the company actually does. I mean, we work with a lot of scale-ups, and you know what it's like, as I said earlier, you know, you're also an entrepreneur. Like, so you have an idea, maybe you partner up with somebody, you get some money, and then you do this thing, and then before you know it, you've got a business with employees, and you're sitting like, what is our purpose? Like, what are we doing here? And a lot of our business comes from companies, either small companies that are scaling up or big companies that want to pivot or at an inflection point where they are asking those questions. And those are the briefs that excite us, because it allows us to then go back and interrogate their current position, you know, look at the perception, how it's treated in the market, how people inside the business, you know, understand what it is the business is doing, and then define narratives for the leaders. And then from that, we go into the improve part, which is, you know, like a PR boot camp, speaker training, media training, for example. And then the impact phase is where it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. So it's engaging with media, and it's looking for earned media opportunities, or earned opportunities, both in the media and on stages. We've got an entire connections division, and what their job is to put together opportunities for our clients to speak at events, I mean, all over the world. But then also to put panels together with our clients who you wouldn't necessarily expect to see on the stage together, and go to organizers and say, we have a panel, this is the abstract, this is what they will be talking about, and here is the moderator as well. So it's hell of interesting for me to come. I mean, you have to remember, you know, I come from a lifestyle background, you know, where I'm promoting Mother's Day and Father's Day and that kind of, you know, go to this hotel and buy this box of chocolates. And to really like crank it up to 11 and really go into the nuts and bolts of why companies are doing what they're doing and what role we can play in them finding their true voice and then promoting that and getting that out to the rest of the world. It's incredibly exciting. It's not like anything I've done before. And I'm learning from the best, especially, and it's not just about me learning about the Dutch landscape. We've got clients that are all over Europe. We've got clients in the UK, plus in the US. So my mind every day, I mean, I always make this joke. I don't know if you remember the Mickey Mouse Club, but the Mickey Mouse Club, Thursday was the anything can happen day. Pretty much every day is a Thursday for me, because anything can happen. And that's one of the reasons that I love being in this business.
So just to throw a sort of a spanning the works here, which is not on the questions that we're chatting about, but how specifically relevant or prominent is climate change part of sort of the awareness of what brands are actually doing out there? Are they considering it? Do they make it part of their sort of their culture? Do they bring it to the foreground, or is it still, shelved for something we're going to get to?
No, it's massive. It's absolutely massive. That and D&I are like the two biggest discussion points in the industry at the moment. Sustainability, but it always goes back to, that purpose of an organization. People understand now, because you've got your workforce, you've got your millennials, you've got your Gen Zs, you've got your Gen Ys, soon we'll have our alphas like joining the ranks. And it's incredibly important for them to work for a company whose purpose is beyond profit.
Yeah.
And that is something that we've seen. People are aware, especially in Europe. I mean, this heat wave that we just had, over 1,000 people passed away. I think it was in Spain and France. So people are very aware that it's kind of now or never. So what can we do individually, but also, as corporate Europe or corporate America or corporate South Africa, what can we do to make those incremental differences that ultimately will add up to a more positive, a positive planet, I guess.
Yeah. Chris, it's fascinating talking to you, and thank you for being able to spend some time with us today. To sort of sum up today's conversation, if you could leave all our business leaders out there and our business, anyone that's really, likes listening to business conversation, what would you leave them with as some thought-provoking sort of ideas to stick with?
I think make sure, as I said earlier, you can't plan for how the world will change, but you can plan for when it does. So that for me is all about being future fit. So give your teams a purpose that really inspires, ensure that the company values and cultures are entrenched. Don't micromanage, trust, foster, like foster, not faster, but foster trust by measuring output and not presence. Ensure that trust exists between colleagues, as well as ensuring that whatever like client agency relationship, there really is a partnership, because we're here for the long haul. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But also be agile. Iterate until you get it as close to perfect as possible. And then also map the communication flow. Because think about you and me. We can LinkedIn, we can email, we can WhatsApp. Some of my clients I have on Slack. Make sure that those lines of communication, what channels we use, are streamlined, and who to talk to on what platform and when. So I think those would be my key takeouts for being future fit, and be agile enough to change.
Yeah, I love that. And just to add to what you're saying, is because I think that's so important, is that people still kind of want to go back to the old ways, and we look at some of the HR policies that South African organizations have, and they don't even have policies in place for people to work remotely, right? So when it comes to being agile, and how do you really get to focus on what the output is, instead of micromanaging a process and putting trust out first. Start with trust, because that's so important.
And remember, we're all here to learn, and we're all here to grow, and we're all here to be self-actualized humans. So always lead with empathy. Put yourself in the other person's position first before you judge their decision that they have made, and if it's incorrect, course correct rather than shut down, because that then, firstly, it makes for a non-safe working environment, and if you don't feel safe at work, you're going to go internal, you're not going to feel heard, and then people don't leave companies, people leave people. So it's really important for those lines of communication to be open, and for there to be a culture of safety, inclusiveness, and to be heard.
Absolutely. Chris, lastly, where do we get hold of you? Like, if people want to find out about who you are and FutureFactor and checking in with you guys, where do we go?
So you go to the website FutureFactor.com, and all the socials are on there as well as LinkedIn. That was the last point that I wanted to make. LinkedIn would make for a fascinating topic, just in terms of getting earned media is getting harder and harder to get op-eds placed or thought leadership. Whereas LinkedIn, if you look at the numbers of people that are actually engaging with LinkedIn, I feel like celebrating LinkedIn, because after 10, 12 years of existing, they've become more than just a recruitment tool. They've become the place where you go to for news. And we're seeing this with our clients, is that where in the past we would have been looking to get them, say, an article or expert sourcing piece in one of the big titles, now we actually are helping them create content for their LinkedIn pages, because you're already sitting with an audience who cares. And if you look at earned media opportunities, oftentimes it's behind a paywall. So how many people are really seeing that? So both have got pros and cons. And it's one of those things about being future fit, is that at the end of the day, what we're doing is just ensuring that we've got a channel, we've got a communication, and we've got an audience, and to ensure that we know where that audience is sitting.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Verrijdt, Communications Director at FutureFactor. Guys, go and check it out. He's on LinkedIn, and go check out the website. Chris, thank you so much for chatting to me.
Thanks, Kevin.
Have a fantastic day, and chat to you soon.